Hello and welcome to Entropia's monthly professional development webinar. I'm so glad that you were able to join me this week or this month for a topic that all of us can probably use a little bit more tips on, and that's on time management. I really thank you for joining in because the fact that you're joining really does say that you do have time for that. Just a reminder for those of you that may be new to the professional development webinars, they are complimentary and open to all, and very befitting. They're only 30 minutes to fit your busy schedule. Keep in mind that they are condensed versions of workshops and various coaching offerings that Entropia provides. If there's anything in here that has gotten your attention or you would like to have a full-length program delivery, feel free to contact us at entropiaconsulting.com, or you may reach us by phone at area code 202-455-0426. Again, for those that are new, and just a little bit about Entropia Consulting, I am Marquita Qualls, known affectionately within the scientific community as Dr. Q. I'm a trained scientist, but also a business professional that has had various leadership positions in corporate and nonprofit environments. I have successfully navigated my career from the bench to global management strategy roles at one of the leading pharmaceutical organizations. When I formed Entropia, it was, in essence, to assist professionals of all disciplines, not just scientists, because when you are working in, whether it be corporate or nonprofit environment, you will interact with various people in various professions. So my goal with Entropia was to assist professionals who were interested in developing and strengthening their skills that enable them to be more productive, more effective, and attain a greater work-life balance. If you have any questions that you did not submit when you did your registration, please feel free to enter those, and I will be checking them periodically throughout the webinar, and we'll try to answer them if time permits. Today, as you saw in the outline, we're going to talk about three main things: defining time wasters and distinguishing them from actual value-added activities or tasks, learn a new tool for some and reinforcing for others, a tool on how to prioritize your priorities. And then we'll just kind of have some fun and look and explore some traditional as well as some technology tools that will enable you to increase your productivity. I will go and share with you a disclaimer. Time management systems and tools actually take time. If you haven't got the time to do it right, and that means paying 100% attention and practicing the things that you will learn, it actually is counterproductive. And so as you go throughout the webinar, there may be things that you have heard before, but what's important is that if you've never tried them or if you've never applied them, then you can't expect these systems or these tools to work in terms of enhancing or increasing your time management. Let's first go through some ground rules on time. First and foremost, time is indiscriminate. Everyone, regardless of your position or your title or your age, everyone has the same 60 seconds per minute. You're not going to get any more or you're not going to get any less. So when you look at people who are able to effectively manage their activities within the time that they're allotted, they don't have any necessarily unfair advantage because you all have those same 60 seconds in every minute. It's just a matter of how you're managing your activities within the time that you're given. Time is non-renewable. I never forget, I was in the 6th grade and one of my teachers says, you know, you're wasting time that you'll never get back. And as a 6th grader, it doesn't always register or resonate what that really means. But as I got older, I always remember her saying that, I'll never get this back. And it's really true. Time is the one thing that is non-renewable. Once it's gone, it's gone. You'll never be able to recreate it. There will only be one June 25th, 12:05 p.m. Central Standard Time, 1:05 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And finally, all of us have heard this cliche, but it really is true. Time is money. It's the currency for every activity that you conduct throughout the day, the week, the month, and the year. All of your activities that are done within the day are either things that you want to do, things that you must do, or things that basically are wasting your time. But also remember that time is all-inclusive. Because you are a whole person, that means that everything you do, all of your activities, really take into account your personal and your professional activities. And so that's why it's really important that when you're talking about time management or managing activities within the time that you're given, work-life balance is really important. So let's look at what time wasters are. I'm sure that there are many definitions out there for time wasters. You probably have your own definition of what a time waster is. But for the purpose of this webinar and this discussion, I'd like to say that a time waster is any person, place, or thing in which you engage that produces a low return for the benefit for the time that you invested. It's those things, those people, or those places that you go that are non-productive and prove inefficient for your overall goals. So if that's a time waster, then what's a value-added task? Well, value-added tasks, again, for the purpose of this discussion, I'd like to say that value-added tasks are things that are actually fulfilling or meeting those stated goals and objectives of the customer. And who's the customer? The customer might be you. The customer may be your management, or in the traditional sense of customer, it really may be your client that you're serving. But value-added tasks, and this is something to really remember and important, value-added tasks are things that are done right the first time. Doing it right the first time means that you're not having to repeat them, because when you have to repeat a task, that means that it's taking more time to do something and it decreases in value. So what are some of your time wasters? This is not an exhaustive list, but it is it's a fairly complete list of fairly common time wasters that we experience throughout the day. And I'm sure you can add to this list. Interruptions, drop-in visitors, unplanned conversations, that phone call that you get right as you're getting ready to focus in on writing out that memo or crafting out your project timeline, you get a phone call that you have to take, or you feel as though you have to take, that eats in 5 to 10 minutes of your time. Meetings, and I'm sure all of you might agree, there are plenty of meetings that have just been a waste of your time, whether they were scheduled meetings or those impromptu meetings. As I mentioned earlier in the value add, duplicating efforts. Are you doing things more than once? And why are you doing things more than once? Is it because of your organization skills, or is it for some other reasons that you didn't understand what you were doing the first time? Game apps, the internet, Facebooking, all of these things, clutter, all of these things are time wasters. I'm going to give you a second to really think about what, if anything, on this list you perceive as a time waster. You may be wondering why I have highlighted and bolded out multitasking. Multitasking, in my opinion, is probably one of the greatest time wasters that we do. We like to say that we're really good at doing a lot of things at the same time in multitasking, but actually what multitasking tends to do is allow you not to give your best or quality on 5 things. You're kind of doing mediocre, and in many cases when you multitask, you never really finish or complete any of them. And so in essence, it's a waste of your time because you're having to duplicate the effort and redo those things. Usually when you're multitasking, you're never giving your full attention to any one thing. And as a result, you miss out and you potentially miss out on key information or key facts. So you really have to evaluate when you are multitasking, is it really worth it in terms of your effective time management strategies? Are you really being efficient when you're multitasking? So ideally, if you had the pie chart and you divided up those three areas, the things that you must do, the things that you want to do, and then waste, 50% of your time should really be devoted to the things that you must do. Then about only 5 to 10% of your time should really go to waste. Now, it's really impossible to go throughout the day and not have any type of waste. We're not 100%. No one's perfect. But if you could get to only having 5 to 10% of your entire time devoted to waste, that's pretty good. But what actually happens in reality is we spend about 2/3 of our time on waste. At least that's the case for me in many cases. I spend about 2/3 of my time, and most people that I know, if they're honest with themselves, 2/3 of their time is devoted to waste activities or time wasters. And only about the remaining third, a little more than half of the remaining thirds are things that you want to do. And what actually happens, the things that we must do, those things that should have the most amount of our time actually end up taking the least amount of our time. And we aren't as effective and we're not efficient. So how do you distinguish time wasters from value-added activities and tasks? So if you think back to the list that we just went through, all of those things are tasks. They're things that we have to do. And it's not to say that they're not important or they're not to say that there aren't things that we should be engaging, but how do you distinguish when they are time wasters or when they're value-added? Now, if you've been to these webinars enough, you know that I like charts, and so I created a quick little chart about what a time waster would be versus what a value-added task would be. So let's think about checking email. If you're constantly checking your email, then that actually is a time waster, because rather than constantly checking it, always having it up on your monitor, up on your screen, and reading and looking for, waiting for that email, you could actually make that a value-added activity by checking your email, let's say 4 times per day. When you come in the morning, a little bit before lunchtime, right after lunchtime, and before you get ready to go home. It may not seem feasible for some because we're so tied to this constant electronic information, or the perception that we must be in constant communication and contact with people via this email. I've got to respond to it now. But it actually would become more value added if you could kind of cordon off the time for checking your email. And we have smartphones that have alerts every time that we get a new email that comes in. A value-added task would be to silence those alerts on the smartphones for your email settings and train and discipline yourself to only check them certain times throughout the day. Drop-in visitors and phone calls. It's a time waster. It's not to say that you can't get any value from those drop-in or those impromptu meetings, but in order to make that a value-added task, one of the things that you can do is establish some boundaries up front. If someone comes to your office, if someone gives you a phone call that's unexpected, or again, those drop-in visitors, make that value added by saying, hey, I'm working on something right now. I can give you about 5 minutes of my time, and stick to it. It's really easy to say it up front, but not follow through. But if you let people know what your boundaries are and you establish those boundaries, then they won't intrude upon your time. People only do what you allow them to do. So if I tell you, hey, I only have 2 or 3 minutes to chat with you right now, and especially if you've come to my office or my desk or my space, and I let you know up front in a nice way that I only have X amount of time allotted to do this, then they will respect that time. But again, you have to be able to establish and enforce and follow through on it and not allow it to carry over. If it seems as though it's going to be something that carries over, then one of the things that you should do is say, hey, can we schedule time? Can I pencil you in on my calendar to finish this discussion? People will appreciate that, and you will appreciate it for your sanity and stress management much later if you start to follow through on these things. Again, duplicating efforts. It's a time waster, but how can you make that value added? Is communicating first. Talk to people. See who has done something similar, if not the very same activity. It's no sense in reinventing the wheel or recreating the wheel, but when you communicate with people and you understand what it is that you're doing, it eliminates the time that you're spending on duplicating those efforts. Think about it this way. You should touch nothing twice. Think about that for a second. How many things, how many activities do you do throughout the day, whether it be email, whether it be crafting a report, whether it be cleaning, whether it be, anything that you do? How many things do you actually touch twice throughout the day? If you start to make mental notes of those now, and actually maybe you have to jot some of them down, if you start to pay more attention to those things that you are touching twice, then work towards only doing it once, and I bet you'll see a drastic improvement in the amount of time that's freed up. Multitasking, again, time waster. How do you make those value added? You don't have to do everything. You can delegate, and then you prioritize. Speaking of prioritizing, oh wait, before we go there, moving from waste to value depends on your discipline to act. Again, it's really all up to you and how disciplined you are in implementing these actions. It's one thing to say it, it's another thing to know it, but it's even more powerful to actually act and do it. Don't just talk about it, be about it. Let's talk about prioritizing your priorities. Every priority is important, but every priority is not urgent. If there's one thing that I could say about this that I would just kind of drill in is ask for clarity, particularly if you're in a work environment working on projects and you have multiple projects that you're working on. You may be working on multiple papers to prepare for publications and submitting to different agencies. How do you determine what's important or what's priority? You have to ask for clarity with your colleagues, with your manager, because 9 times out of 10, what you think is urgent is really just kind of important and not necessarily something that you have to be stressing out over of delivering, and how are you going to manage these priorities. I'm going to go into a priority model or matrix on the next slide, so we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. Prioritizing your priorities. Create a list of your priorities or a list of activities that you perceive to be your priorities on paper, not just mentally. We're very good at doing this in our head, but the real prioritizing comes when you're able to put them down on paper. Then rank them according to value. Establish your rating system based upon the degree of importance and urgency. Again, on our next slide, we're going to talk about how you're doing that. But finally, after you have created your list, after you've done your rankings, just do it. You have got to do it. Not just talking about it, not just thinking about it, not just seeing something nicely written down, but then you actually put these priorities into action. Some of you may be familiar with the 7 Habits Time Management Matrix, and this is what this particular model is based upon. It's based upon, it's based upon urgency, and it's based upon importance. How you differentiate between urgency and importance. Urgency or urgent matters are usually deadline driven. You have to have it in by a certain time. Important matters or activities talk about or deal with the impact that it will have on either you or another person or another project. Things that are in this quadrant, things that are not urgent and not important, means that they actually can be removed or ignored. Don't spend a lot of time or don't spend any time in terms of your prioritization list of things that are not urgent, things that are not deadline driven, and things that are not important or things that won't have a little to significant impact on anyone. When things are urgent but not important, that means you can delegate those activities. Don't spend a lot of time on them for yourself because they're not really going to have that great of an impact on you, but it still is urgent in terms of it may be time sensitive or deadline driven, but you can always send someone else in your place. If it's not urgent, or if it's not really deadline driven, but it really is important to you, that means you do it ASAP, as soon as possible. And finally, if it is urgent and it's important, that means you do it immediately. Those are the things that go to the top of your list. Just to give you a couple of examples, not urgent, not important, internet surfing. So whether it's checking the news online or whether it's Facebooking, those are things that, we'd like to do. They're nice to have, but they actually eat up a lot of our time and not really our priority. So just kind of remove those from your list of priorities. Meetings. Again, delegate those things. Some meetings may be urgent, but meetings aren't really all that important as to where you have to be that person there, unless, of course, it is a project-driven deadline meeting. Networking. Networking is extremely important, but it's not necessarily time sensitive. You can always network. And product delivery. Again, if you have something that has to be delivered, a product launch, or if you're in the cake business and you have cakes that have to be baked, those things are urgent. You have to get those things done. Just as a note, ASAP stands for as soon as possible. ASAP doesn't mean drop everything and do it now. ASAP means as soon as it is possible to get it done. And a lot of us misuse the ASAP and misunderstand ASAP for meaning I've got to do it now, where it moves into this quadrant, to the urgent and important, when in actuality, it's really important, it's just not urgent. So finally, in the last couple of minutes that we have together, we're going to talk about some traditional or technological tools for increased productivity. Now, I realize there was a lot of information that was kind of crammed in the first 20 minutes or so of this, but hopefully you'll be able to unpack some of this and go back and listen to the webinar as well as review the notes that I send out. And you'll actually have an impact, or it will have an impact on your productivity and efficiency. Traditional tools. Now, some of you may be laughing when you see the traditional tools for time management, but computers may be faster, but they sometimes take longer. And what do I mean by that? It's nothing better than good old-fashioned pencil and paper for you to be able to jot your notes down, and you can easily go back to them. You don't have to boot up a computer. You don't have to wait for the system to load. You don't have to wait for it to connect to the internet to try to access the information. You have your pencil and paper right in front of you where you're collecting your notes, where you're writing down your list of priorities, where you are, creating all of your appointments. The clock. How many of you have clocks in your offices or in your home offices? Having a clock is really a good thing, and a battery-operated clock is at that, not always one that is relying on electricity, because you never know when you may lose power. But it's good to keep track of the time and have it in the forefront of your mind so you'll know how much time you've allotted and how much time you have left to complete these activities. If you're not in the office, there's good old-fashioned watches. I mean, so many of us rely nowadays on our cell phones or our smartphones for everything, for our clocks, for our calendars, but traditional tools do come in handy. Writing things down help to reinforce us to make sure that we act upon them. You may be wondering, what's the hourglass for? Remember when I was talking earlier about having people coming in your office and those impromptu or unannounced visits or phone calls? Well, I actually have seen people that have, and know people that have these little hourglasses on their desk. And so when people do come in and they say, hey, I have about 5 minutes to chat, the hourglass stops. The hourglass starts. They flip it over, and when the time and the sand runs out, then that's a way to let them know that the conversation is over, and in order for us to continue, we can schedule it, or, we move on. May seem kind of cruel, may seem kind of terse, but it works for some people. Smartphones, technological tools. Utilize the internet for remote working. Meetings, video conferences, you don't always have to be there in person, especially with the use of technology. If your time is not going to require you to drive from point A to point B and back to point A for a meeting, it's nothing wrong with picking up the phone or picking up the, logging on to a Skype and video conference. The smartphones, learn to use the features on our phones. I mean, there's so many features on the phone that most of us kind of just say, oh, I'll just get a productivity app. But there's so many options and so many features that are embedded within our phone. If we would learn how to use them and use them in different ways, it would actually help us with our productivity. Do you use the calendar feature on your phone? If you have a smartphone, then you typically are carrying it with you everywhere you go. So why not sync up all of your calendars? You're writing them down with your desk calendar, but go ahead and import it into your mobile device and then sync that with your, your Microsoft Outlook calendar. Your clock options, your voice recorder. How many times have you been out and needed to remember something to do later? Use the voice recorder on your phone and you're able to play it back later. And even the camera is not always something to use for taking those cute little pictures of your kids. You can also take pictures of maybe a billboard that will help you to remember a product that you can buy later, or, use it for outside of the box thinking of their usual or normal purposes. The phones have a lot of features, and I'm sure if you would just spend, about 15 minutes to an hour of your time to actually learn the features and learn how to use them, it will pay dividends later. So in conclusion, it's really the same as the disclaimer. Regardless of what you've learned today, of what you've heard today, of what you have learned in previous seminars, previous books or readings, time management systems and tools actually take time. If you haven't got the time to do it, and if you haven't got the time to do it right, it's counterproductive. You actually end up wasting time because you're doing things over and over and over again. So here's your assignment. I normally don't do assignments, but for this one I thought it was pretty neat to do, and this is something that I always have all of my clients to do, is creating a time budget. Time is money. And the time budget is exactly like you would for your monetary or financial budget. Pick a day of the week, write down the date, and then for a 24-hour period, budget your time in the left column. It sounds pretty simple, but I guarantee you if you do it, you'll see and begin to identify how many activities just kind of eat away and turn from value-added activities to wasted activities. So on the budgeted activity, these are all of the things that you plan or intend to do. And when you actually do them, you'll actually monitor on the right side what actually happened during that time period. So you include things such as sleep, work, play, anything that you do within a 24-hour period, watching TV, just sitting looking out of the window, all of those things that you include on your time budget. After you do that, you pick the day, you monitor your activity, you do your budget to actuals, send me an email and let me know how it goes. mqualls@entropiaconsulting.com. You can go to my website, contact us, give me a call, Facebook, any of those ways to contact me. But I'd like to know, How are you budgeting your time? And let me know, what do you have time for? I've got time to listen for you. And I hope that you enjoyed this webinar. See you next month.